Welcome back to the Small Town Summits podcast. I am Michael Badger, one of your co-hosts, and on this week's episode, I, along with our other co-host, Ben Whittinghill, had the wonderful opportunity to speak with a man who has had a big impact on pastors and pastors' wives here in New England, a man named Phil Waldrep. Phil is the head of Phil Waldrep Ministries, a ministry that has many arms doing many wonderful things, including ministering to those who are laboring for the gospel in New England. Whether it be through free retreats, supplying Bibles, or aiding pastors and pastors' wives in receiving biblical counseling, the Lord has used his ministry greatly over the past several decades. We speak to him about all of this and more in this week's episode. We hope you enjoy this conversation and are greatly encouraged by it. Well, welcome to the Small Town Summits podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Michael Badger, here along with your other co-host, Ben Whittinghill. And we have the joy and the privilege today of sitting down with Phil Waldrep of Phil Waldrep Ministries. Now, Phil, for people who don't know you or may be unfamiliar with who you are, what you do, can you just give us a biography of who you are, maybe a little short spiel of how you came to faith and what you do now?
I don't know how much time we have because I can give you the short version or I can give you the long version. I was privileged to be born and reared in Alabama, as far away from New England as probably you can be in the United States. But I grew up with a wonderful mom and dad. Church was a regular part of our life. When I was 7 years of age, I was very much aware that I was a sinner, that I needed a personal relationship with Christ. And it was just before my 8th birthday that I remembered consciously giving my heart to the Lord Jesus Christ and saying, I want to follow you for all my life. Now, sometimes people say, do you think 7-year-olds know what they were doing? Well, I did, because I was reared in a home where, reading the Bible and praying every day, being in church every time there was a service, that was a part of our routine. So I had a really strong foundation. My life's goal was to go to Auburn University and to become a veterinarian. I wanted to doctor cows. We had cattle, so I wanted to doctor cows. I didn't want to do dogs and cats. That's like, children. I wanted to, cattle, it's business. But the Lord had different plans. And when I was a teenager, by the time that I was 14, 15 years of age, I sensed a call to ministry. And I'd already been promoted a grade in high school. So I actually graduated high school when I was 16. I was getting very close to graduating from high school. And it was like, Lord, what do you want me to do in my life? Do I become a veterinarian? What do you want me to do? And I remember it was a very clear call in my heart that I was to go into ministry. Now, at the time, I didn't sense I would be a pastor. It wasn't that I had wonderful pastors. I never had a pastor who had disappointed me or discouraged me, but I felt that I was called to be a vocational evangelist, meaning that I would be one who would travel from churches. And in those days, to lead in a lot of church revivals, church renewals, crusades, and things like that. And I did that for a vast part of my early life. It was very common in the South, and literally with week after week after week, I would be speaking night after night after night. When I look back, I think I did it too much. And then, in 1984, I had a friend who came to me and asked me would I consider putting together a youth camp and allowing churches to go to it, because I was doing a lot of those just by virtue of my age. And so I remember I think it was 1984, that I said, okay, we'll do the first one. If you'll kind of head it up and I'll help you and I'll prove to you this is not going to work. Well, the opposite happened. We had about 248 kids, which I thought was, tremendous. And the next year we had 400. The next year we had 800. The next year we had 1,200. And so I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed putting together, bringing in speakers and worship leaders. And so that launched a whole part of our ministry. We had formed our ministry as a nonprofit in 1980, but this had opened up a whole new world of doing events and conferences. And so we started doing a number of those and still do. We have a wonderful staff that handles all of those, that we do women's conference, men's conference, and celebrators, which is for older adults, senior adults. that we do, and many of those have well in excess of 10 to 15,000 people who attend each one of them. So they're very large. Really, that was part of what we did, but my heart was still in the local church. It still is in the local church. I think there's an advantage when there are large events where Christians can get together, but it never can replace what happens in the local church. So my heart is still in the local church, and everything we do is geared to undergirding and building and strengthening the local church. So that's what we do. And along the way, my wife and I got married. We've been married 41 years. And she was a godsend. Got two great kids, our two daughters, who are married to two wonderful guys. One of them is actually our creative director. The other is a minister of worship at a church in North Carolina, our two son-in-laws. And so we have a great family. Debbie and I are grateful every day that our kids chose to serve the Lord we serve. That's not everybody's story. It's not a fault of parenting. It's not because we were great parents. It was just that God gives us the privilege to be involved. And so they're very involved in ministry as well.
Really wonderful to hear. I'd love for you to explain a little bit more about Phil Waldrep Ministries in total. When I hear Phil Waldrep Ministries, because of your kindness and generosity, I think pastors and wives retreats for New England. But I don't know the scope of Phil Waldrep Ministries beyond that. So it's thrilling to hear that you're still hosting these events that are drawing such large numbers of people for discipleship and for training. But maybe you can share a little bit more with us about what your ministry looks like today.
Well, we do those events, and there are several of those a year. We do actually, I think 16, 18 major events a year. As a matter of fact, next week we have one of our women's events. It's actually a cruise. So we'll be leading a cruise of about 500 women. That's smaller, but it is a cruise. We'll be in the Caribbean, and with the winter storm that's coming through Alabama, we're grateful that we're going to be there. But we do those events, and I'm still preaching almost every Sunday in a local church. I still do that as my schedule permits. I also do quite a bit of writing. I have 3 major books that are out, one of which is called Reaching Your Prodigal, which is done. It's been in print now for a long time and has become, somebody's really written and addressed. I'm a very practical oriented person, meaning I want to not just give people, here's what you ought to do, but to help walk them along. If you want to put that in a biblical concept, I think part of my preaching gift at Leave is exhortation, not just teaching, but okay, now that I know this, what do I do with it? And so that's been a very vital part of what we do. And then we have a whole division where we do mission-oriented activities. And that's where all the things that we do and are continuing to do and are expanding to do in New England, how that all fits in as well. So I lead a team between our part-time and our full-time, most of which are full-time. I think counting myself and my wife, I think there's 18 of us now. And then we have a lot of people who come in who are as needed. But we have a group of about 40 people that either work our conferences or here every day or are part-time or along those lines. So it's a pretty good team, and God's been good to us, and I can't complain. My 2 longest term employees, one has been here. Our director of our conferences has been with me for 31 years. We have one of the ladies who's in our graphics department who's been here 30 years. So they tend to stick around, which is, I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's a wonderful thing. They're wonderful people that share our vision. Every day, they hear this from me every day. Our goal is to make an eternal difference in the life of every person we encounter. And that's our daily goal. And that's our mission.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, as somebody who's been blessed by your ministry specifically here in New England, we actually had a conversation not too long before we jumped on with you with another man who's been blessed by your ministry here in New England, a man named Tim Counts, who said that he's been going to these events that you put on up here in New England for so long that it feels like a family reunion when it comes each year. But can you explain why New England? What first stirred your heart for New England? Why New England ministry? You know, a lot of people down south, I'm from Tennessee, don't really think about New England other than like, well, you know, everybody up north is just kind of mean and rude and all that kind of stuff. So how did God pierce your heart for New England pastors and pastor wives?
Well, before we say that, let me say, I'm glad you talked to Tim Counts. Tim Counts is one of my dear friends in New England. And by the way, I have said this publicly before. I've said it privately. I said it again. I think Tim Counts is one of the best Bible preachers in the nation. So anytime I'm in Manchester or we're in Manchester, if I can any way make it happen, I'm going to be sitting in his church on Sunday morning just to hear him preach. And, you know, a lot of times people don't think of people in New England who are very gifted expositors and preachers of the word, but there's a number of them across New England. Tim Camps just happens to be one of them, and he and his family are one of my favorite families there too. But I'll tell you how it all began. I grew up in the South, where literally every street corner has a church. Now, I would say evangelical church, but I'm using that loosely. But most churches in the South, you know, in the county where I live, most people were Southern Baptist. We had a few others, but that's just kind of culturally what we were. And I do use that word culturally because there's a lot of cultural Christianity in the South. And I grew up assuming it was that way across the country. And when I began to read church history and I would read about the Great Awakenings, I thought New England particularly would be even deeper spiritually, even more so than I found in the South. And so in 1984, I had a friend, his name was Bob Campbell, who was working with the Baptist Convention of New England, now called Baptist Churches of New England, and who called me, and they were going to have all of these simultaneous revivals in churches, trying to get everybody to do it. And they were going to have like this publicity campaign, PR campaign of commercials of saying, you know, attend a Southern Baptist church in your community. They'll have services this week. And he called me, he asked me if I'd be willing to do one of those. Now, remember, I'm 23 years old. I'm about to get married. And he actually called my parents because he knew my parents and said, you know, we'd love for Phil to come. Would he be willing to do it? It's a mission trip, had to pay his own way. So my parents agreed if I'd be willing to go, they'd pay my way. So in April of 1984, I was paired with a man named Aubrey Jones. Aubrey was the pastor of Precision Valley Baptist Church in North Springfield, Vermont. And, you know, I went in there with all of this excitement of, boy, I'm finally going to get to be in one of those New England churches. At the time, I'd never been above the Mason-Dixon one. And so I remember I arrived. Aubrey was from Mississippi. So we kind of hit it off just because we could talk, you know, SEC football and all the things that Southerners talk about. And he was several years older than I was. But on Sunday morning, I went to his church, and I never will forget it because I grew up where there was a lot of emotions in your preaching. And so that Sunday morning, boy, I'm preaching and I'm just laying the word on. And I knew it was so effective because nobody moved. I mean, nobody moved. And I thought, boy, you know, they're under deep conviction. And when the service was over with, there was this wonderful man named Norm still in that church, who's a great guy. And Norm walked up to me, true Vermonter. He walked up, and the first thing a Vermonter ever said to me after I preached in New England was he walked up to me and he said, hey, who are you mad at? You know, because they had never heard nobody raise their voice. Now, I don't do that now, but I tell Norm all the time, he taught me more about preaching in that one statement in New England than I could have learned in the 40s, because I realized culturally it was different. Now, fortunately, that was a very gracious church. Been there many times. Aubrey Jones, my friend, is now with the Lord. But when I was with Aubrey, he would drive me around and show me that a lot of what I thought was churches with those beautiful Christmas card pictures now were community centers or historical societies. Your church had long clocks. And so I was like, you're kidding. And then began to realize that he was literally traveling at that time 50 or 60 miles to meet with another pastor who wasn't even a Baptist, but somebody who loved Jesus, believed in the heresy of Scripture, was committed to sharing the gospel. And even though they disagreed on some things, they would meet for fellowship. And he told me the number one need we have is I get so lonely, I feel isolated, I'm so discouraged. And it really was Aubrey Jones who said to me, you need to think about starting a time when pastors and their wives can come and just have a couple of nights, 3 days. We don't have to do anything because he said, we're used to having to do everything from, turning on the lights, turning on the heat, sweeping out the church or whatever. And a lot of times, teaching a Sunday school Bible class, the singing. He said, some of us do it all. And he said, but we don't have the funds to go because most of us are working 40 hours a week. Would you raise the money to do it? And initially that really wasn't, I'm like, I just don't know. And then, I also had a friend named Mike Griffin who went called in New Hampshire. He was up in the North Country, who actually went there to help start a church. And through him and through hearing what he was saying at Aubrey, I'm like, well, maybe we should do this. And so took it before the Lord and said, Lord, I don't know how we're going to do this, but if you'll provide. And so I remember that's been over 30 years ago. We were at I guess it's still a holiday yet in Rutland, Vermont. I don't know. But the hardest things I had, guys, was getting people to come the first year. I mean, if somebody calls you up and says, hey, we're going to put you in 2-night hotels or meals. We just want to love on you. And it's all free. And that was the era when there was so much of the, what you call it, where you buy a week. I can't think, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Where they would try to get you to come.
Like the timeshares kind of
thing.
Yeah,
timeshares, to sell you timeshares. And so everybody thought it's one. I'm like, no, it wasn't. And I think the first year we had 24 people, maybe 26. I know it wasn't more than 30. And when it was all over with, half of them was apologizing, kept waiting for the sales pitch. And of course, then they told their friends who told their friends who told their friends. And the rest was history. But as I started going to New England, traveling to New England, getting to know pastors in New England, understanding the need and the heartbeat, God just gave me that heartbeat for New England. And to this day, one of my favorite things to do is when I'm in New England, just get out and ride. Vermont was the first state I went to, so I always think Vermont will be special. But there's 251 villages, cities, and corporations in Vermont, 251. And I make it a practice that I'm going to pray for one of those cities every single day. And I discovered a long time ago, if you start praying for people, God will start sharing his heart for those people. And I think that started it. Now that's expanded it for all the 6 New England states. But that's how my heart, and God was good because my wife has the same heart. And when my oldest daughter was about to get married to the young man who's on our staff, one of the things he shared with her, totally unaware, was his heart for New England and how God gave him a heart for New England. So he's just kind of knit our whole family with New England. I know this is not biblically correct, so please take it to the Spirit. And I said, but I generally tell people, if I die in heaven's full, God can send me to Vermont in the summer. I want to be there in the summer. So, but that's how much I love. And it's just been through that experience and getting to know people and being able to pray for people and with people. And that's how the retreat started. And since then it's grown. Now, as you know, we do 2 of them because we have a commitment, because we study what we do. We don't want over 250 people, because when you move over 250 people, it's no longer a retreat. It's now a conference. And those have 2 different purposes, 2 different missions. We want it where people can feel included, where there's time for fellowship and networking, because one of the underlying purposes of that retreat is to get men and women to meet other men and women who are in ministry, where they either live nearby or there's a common interest or a common struggle that takes place. And so they find out there's someone who lives near them where they can fellowship and have that common core. They may have theological differences. On the basics, they're on the same things, but they may have some theological differences. I don't agree theologically with everybody who comes. Now, On the basics, there's some, but there may be some who do infant baptism, for example, others who do not. I would be of the persuasion not to do that, but there are some who come who do. And I'm like, look, we want you here. If your heart's for the gospel and you love Jesus, we want to encourage you in the work. So that's really how I got started. Been doing it now all these years.
I think what's so endearing for people listening in is you can hear how genuinely you love people here and how your heart beats for Jesus to receive the glory that he's due here. And it's not new. It's not a flash in the pan. It's been for 30 years. And so, you know, if you're kind of suspicious of things that are new or people that are in it for some other reason, like you're selling something like a timeshare, and they realize like, oh, this is actually just very generous, very genuine, and long lasting. That's moving to hear of you praying for all these Vermont towns as two guys who are ministering in Vermont. So thank you for that.
Sure.
I'd love for you to share though, in addition to it's a beautiful ministry, we share this burden or this desire to connect people who are ministering in similar areas, to help them to know they're not alone, to encourage them. It's very much the heartbeat of our summits. I'd love for you to share with people listening in. A lot of our audience is in New England. That's the main audience that we have, small town New England. And probably most of them have heard of your ministry, just word of mouth, different people that have been a part of it. Maybe some of them listening in, it's the first time. They don't know what they would expect. And so usually by the time I hear about, oh, this Phil Waldrep retreat, you're like, it's booked. I mean, this is like a high demand, people love it thing. So what can you explain those twice a year, what the design and format, what they would expect if they and their spouse came to one of these events?
Well, they're both in the fall. We always do them usually around Labor Day. This year, they're actually the week before. And the first one is a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That's a little bit of a different format. We've normally been Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We always put people in a very, very nice hotel. I tell people, missions does not have to be spelled MISERY. Now, we're not, you don't have to be miserable. We just say, I have often said, we want you to be treated like a king and a queen for 3 days. And I want you to go somewhere where if you have the opportunity to get away with your spouse, where would be a place you would want to go? And so I know like this coming fall, we're in, is it Samoset, which is up in Maine, which is a wonderful resort. And then we're at the Equinox, which is in Manchester, Vermont, is where the other one is. And we move them around a little bit. There's certain hotels we use a lot because we have a good relationship with them. One is like the Omni Mount Washington. That has become that's probably become one of the favorites of people who come. And it's just perfect for what we do. You're isolated, you're not in the big city. When people come the first night, here's what's going to happen. And then I'll tell you, after I give you kind of the agenda, I'll tell you what we're trying to accomplish, which really surprises people when I tell. But they'll come the first night, get there. Usually we have some kind of chicken fingers or something, just because a lot of times we don't have time to stop and eat. We have an opening worship service, and I will bring in someone to share. It may not be someone you know, although we have had people like David Jeremiah, who's been there with us. He's a dear friend. His wife's from New Hampshire, by the way. A lot of people don't know that. So there's a little inside track with him. He has a heart for New England. That worship service. Following the worship service, everybody who attends is given someone from outside of New England who has come to New England to be an encourager. It's usually almost always a couple. They have a heart for New England, and they are going to take you, have a prayer time, listen for your heartbeat. What can they pray with? What can you rejoice with you about? What are some good things God said? And so they are part of that prayer time. Then we have a big fellowship that night. It's usually like a pizza party or something, because everybody wants to see everybody, or they want to meet other people. So there's a lot of fellowship that night. The next morning we have breakfast, and then we have the only time we do a breakout session. And we really do this for the women, not so much for the men. And even though we have a breakout time for the men, it's the women who want to hear from other women. So we will bring in usually a well-known person who is a women's speaker, just to speak to women about where they are. At the same time, a lot of times the men is on more Q&A, or we'll take something specific, what maybe some new ideas you can use in ministry, that maybe a little bit of approach. It's a little bit of training, but I don't really like to use that word. Then we have a morning worship service, and then we have a box lunch with our prayer group. We're free all afternoon. And then that night we come back for a really nice dinner. And we usually do it really nice. I mean, we make it like if you're going to go out somewhere really nice, and we make that a fun night. Now, it depends. We change the program up, but a lot of that is just to laugh and have fun, relax. And then the next morning, there's breakfast, it's low income breakfast. And then we have a final worship service and we leave. And even though it's quick, I'll tell you what our three missions are, our three goals of being within it. Number one is we want people to rest. I tell people the older I get, the more I realize taking a nap is a spiritual thing. Because I think in ministry, we go so hard, so hard, so hard. So there's always something that needs our attention. So when you're able to come to the retreat and just rest, it's amazing how that's encouraging yourself. Number two is an opportunity for you to spend time with your spouse. Because a lot of times if you're in ministry, and especially if your spouse is working, there's not a lot of time that you have to be given. And then the third thing is to have your network, to meet new people, to meet people who have similar experiences that they can help you become a resource. If nothing else, just to be friends. Because when you're in ministry, there's times you just need to go eat with another ministry couple. Not really to talk about problems, but just because you have that camaraderie that you can maybe open up and talk about some issues in the church where you can't talk to the members of the church. And so that's part of it. And it also, and I would say a fourth thing is so that we become aware of what men and women across the world need. There's a lot of things that we do behind the scene that we don't always put forward. And so by coming to the retreat becomes an opportunity for us to hear. There's nothing worse. I think one of the biggest mistakes ministers make, and if you ever hear me speak to people who want to do ministry anyway, this is one of the things I almost paralize. It's not about going there where we have all of the answers and saying, okay, here's how you do it. It's going there to say, you're the front troops. You're the ones on the front line. What do you need to help enhance your ministry? And it's been amazing how many times I get phone calls from pastors who are like, we're going through this issue. Is there anybody you know who can help us? And normally I do. May not be us, but I'm like, yes, I know a pastor again who's been through something very similar. He can walk you through that. And who are more than willing to do it. So part of it is just that we can kind of be listening ears and to encourage the men and women who are there. And sometimes encouraging doesn't mean I have to be the encourager. It just means, let me just get you with other people to do that. So that's kind of what people can expect when they come. Our goal is our encouragers, we actually have video footage of this. This is how we know if it's a win, is video people as they're walking in. They have kind of plain faces, whatever. And the last morning, watch a video where people are smiling and they're laughing. To quote an early encourager who was with us, he said one time, it's so much fun when you come here and you're with these men and women and you see them leave here ready to charge hell with violence. I've never forgotten that expression, but that's our goal is we don't want people to quit. We want you, if God calls you away from New England or your place of service, we want you to know it, but we don't want you to make an emotional reaction to where you've kind of gone through a valley, you've hit a few rough spots, that you don't bail emotionally. And we want people to be able to rest and to be able to think through, is this really what God wants me to do?
Mm, yeah, that's so sweet. And it's so sweet because there are so many things that, as Ben and I were talking about before with some other people, ministry up here in New England is not all, misery. Like you mentioned before, there's so many sweet and wonderful gifts from God that we get to experience by serving the Lord in these small and forgotten places. But that doesn't negate the fact that it is difficult. There are moments where, it feels like we're just kind of trudging through the mud. So, with that being said, what are some of the fruit that you have seen in your ministry to these New Englanders who you are fighting with them in that fight against things like burnout, or just depression in ministry, all those different kinds of things? What are some of those tangible fruits that you've seen or maybe heard about from those who have attended your conference? Or not conference, sorry, not conference. Get conferences out of here. Retreats.
One of the things that I say, I get a lot of phone calls from people who are going to New England. They're moving to New England. They're going to pastor in New England, or they want to plant a church in New England. And the first thing I tell them that I think the real fruit for us, and this may not be quite what you're asking me, but is helping people to understand this is a marathon. It is not a sprint. Where New England is spiritually is going to take us a long time to get there. I don't think there's a magic formula that somebody's going to move to New England and in 12 months, that their church is running 3,000 or whatever. Now, granted, God can send a revival. I do believe the next great spiritual awakening will have its beginning again. I really believe that. I believe it was what caused the first two to take place. And I think everything is in place for a third great spiritual awakening. Because you got to remember, by definition, yes, there's a definition of a spiritual awakening, but God doesn't need a large number to start a spiritual awakening. It can be a small number. And there's some things, even I tell people, even anecdotally, that you can, for example, New England is the only region of the country, according to the United States Census, where Christianity has grown in the last 10 years. That is United States government data by people who self-identify as an evangelical Christian, which is interesting because in every other region, including the South, it has declined. But in New England, it has grown. And I think now maybe as high as 7% self-identified. I always say that because that's their self-identification, that they're a Christian. But one of the fruits is helping pastors to have what I call a realistic view of ministry in New England, for one thing. The second thing that I see as fruit is realizing, and I did not embrace this role. I didn't see this role. It was a role I sought, but I began to see that they needed someone who could be a friend, who sometimes could just listen. And for me, it's like, and I give you a story, or even when they come to retreat, if you want an example, there's so many of these we have, but let me give you one. A pastor who's up in Maine actually came to the retreat and had in his pocket his resignation. He was resigning his church, not because of any theological difference. It was just hard. It was just hard for him and his wife. And I mean, it was a good church, but it was a small church, financial struggles, both personally and at the church. And God did such a work at the retreat that the last day he asked me if I would tear up his resignation. He is still serving at that church, though it's been 8 years later. And it was amazing. After about 6 months later, they began to see a turnaround in numerical growth. And, there's stories like that all over New England. But one of the roles that I realized that I didn't seek was sometimes a pastor needs a pastor. He needs someone who's been in ministry longer, who can give him an honest assessment. I mean, there are times when I've told guys, I really think I can't be the Holy Spirit, but it may be time for you to leave. It may be time for you to move on for your family's sake, for your church's sake, for your sake. It may be time to move on. And so I think part of that fruit has been being a pastor to people. And we've done this so long now that, and it sounds awkward, but I don't want it to sound awkward. I do more funerals in New England than I do in the South. And almost every funeral I've done in New England has been for a pastor, retired pastor, or a pastor's wife. And I was just there in May. John and Joanne Tracy, who were seniors, but when we started the retreat, was among the first people to ever come, served so faithfully in Barry, Vermont, and had a soup kitchen ministry, and the people they won to Christ. And John went to be with the Lord in February, and He had asked me if I would do his memorial service, and I told him I would. We could postpone it because they chose to be cremated. And so his wife also was planning the service, and she got sick and died. And I actually did a double funeral for John and Joanne Tracy. Now, and it was so special, but what was so special to me was in that service, there were a number of people that John and Joe had won to Christ and who had discipled. And at their request, not a forward come forward, but I did a very clear gospel presentation and invited people that John and Joanne had ministered to, who maybe they had talked to about a relationship with the Lord. We had people who trust in Christ.
Praise God.
Is that fruit? You bet it's fruit, because it's fruit that lasts. I think the world is tired of kind of shiny, flashy, not really real, what's under the hood. But there's been so many examples of men who have been willing to stay, and not run just because it's been tough. So part of it is the fruit is helping people to have a realistic view of ministry, to know what's involved. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. So you've got to stay with it for a long time, because one of the things I've learned, I tell people one day I'm going to write a book on what I've learned about New England. But one of the things I've learned about New England is it takes a long time to have credibility with people. It takes a long time for them to trust you. And in so many of these little communities, pastors have come and gone so quickly. Our churches have started and closed, that sometimes they just wonder, are you going to stick around a while? Are you going to be here a while? So longevity has its price. So I don't know if that answered your question like you wanted, but it's just
certainly.
the fruit I see is that, is guys are staying longer and realizing that now they have credibility and they can start. And a lot of times it may be the person who follows them who numerically takes the church to the next level. But that says a lot about those who are the pioneers who are willing to invest and, stick it out.
Phil, it's amazing. I mean, that far from being awkward, I think your example about the funerals speaks to that level of impact you had on people who they were testing you out for a little while when you first got here. And for you to go from stranger from the South with an Alabama accent and who likes SEC football, and we don't even know what that is, to I would love for you to do my funeral as I go to be with the Lord, is a very, very meaningful and a moving impact. And to hear of a guy ripping up his resignation or asking you to do it are just wonderful examples. I think fabulous commercials for the ministry that God's called you to, and I think massively encouraging for you that the Lord's doing exactly what you're saying you hope the ministry does, and helping people to stay connected, to stay faithful to the Lord, and then for you to be a mentor at that capacity, for you to have that big of an impact is really encouraging. And I think also your encouragement's a great example to guys who are serving, that they themselves may be tempted to throw in the towel, or are we who are ministering in these towns going to be as faithful as you, praying daily for towns of Vermont and continuing to come back year after year and pour your life into New England from a distance? So we are thrilled for how the Lord's using you here. And I want to give you an opportunity to encourage people in closing. But before we go there, Michael was mentioning that you have now a counseling arm of the ministry, that this is a new initiative for you guys. And I don't know if that has implications on people ministering, serving in New England, but I'd love for you to be able to share a little bit about that.
Well, it does. Now, we don't have counselors ourselves in the house. Let me explain how it works. Several years ago, one of my dear friends, who was a pastor in New England, took his life. I have never had anything impact me like that did. And knowing the story and realizing that sometimes men and women who are serving in New England need a solid biblical counselor who is trained to help them process the emotions of what they're going through. And so we started a ministry. We have 3 counselors who are predominantly in the South. One is a guy who's in the Knoxville area. I won't say his name, but he's in the Knoxville area who works with, he's an executive pastor, but he works with pastors, actually, if it's church related or administrative related type issues. We have a lady who works with women who with a specialty. She's a pastor's wife. And then we have another one who works with minor children, teenagers or minor children of pastors that are there, not adult children, but minor children. And then our ministry, every year we raise the funds that any pastor, pastor's wife, or minor children who need counseling, we provide up to 10 sessions, no cost for them to get it. We don't even know the details of it. In fact, we oftentimes, even if a pastor wants some confidentiality, that's the one thing I will deal with directly, arrange so that even my staff doesn't know who's getting that counseling. Now, a lot of times they're like, no, it's fine. One of your staff people can handle that. But that's something that's available for any pastor, pastor's wife, any minor children. I'll say minor because a lot of times it's adult children. We don't do that, but minor children that we do. And another thing, if I could mention this real quick, that's a big love of our life too. We have something called the Bible Project in Union, where every year any church can get leather-bound Bibles, and there's a set number. We want to everybody. If you want to give them to people in leadership, they're nice Bibles. I mean, they're $50, $60, $70 Bibles that you can give. Like if you have somebody who's becoming an elder or a deacon in the church, you want to do a presentation. We also have a program. You get children's Bibles that you can give for children, especially like maybe if they're going into, first grade or something you want to do. We also have a program for if you want to have like gospels or, what I would call inexpensive that you want to give out at an event. All of those are things that we can provide for you. Now, we have a set limit on how many you get every year because we want to spread them around. But I have people who just believe that. We do pew Bibles. That's another one we do. You can get pew Bibles, and we let you pick the version, whatever the pastor's using. But in New England, a lot of times people that aren't believers, they don't have a physical Bible. And it's just really good if the pastor can say, maybe you're new to Christianity or maybe not. Take the pew Bible, turn to page, because, they don't know Job from Job to, Psalms from Palms. They don't know. So if you, that enables, that's been a huge ministry for us too. I have people who believe in that. And who give generously for us to make that possible. So I want pastors to know that's another thing that's available for us, and we can get you information on either one of those, both counselings and the Bible Project.
And it is just like people listening in, they need to rewind 40 years ago to Phil saying, this is not a timeshare. There's no strings attached. So because this is so incredibly generous of you, and we've received Bibles from you in our church, so we're so appreciative. So if people want to look more into either the counseling opportunity or the Bibles, do they go to your website? How do they access
Here's
those
the best way you can do that is send an email to me. My personal email is pw1 at philwaldrep.org. Make sure you spell my name right. PHILWALDREP.org. Just pw1 at philwaldrep.org. It'll come to me directly. I'll pass it on to the people who need and our staff, and they'll get in contact with you. So yeah, I'm glad you got the Bible. People still like a physical Bible. I know we have electronics and all of that, but there's something about a physical Bible. And one of the things that's so neat about a pew Bible, if somebody is been coming, they're learning, they're new Christian, you're in a position to say, hey, that's your gift. Take that Bible home. It's yours. Take it home. And, have other ones you can put back in the pew Bible. I tell people the Word of God can go places and do more than any of us can do. And, and we even have, the funny side, one of these days I'm going to make a funny side of what I call funny things in New England. And one of them is we've had some, what you would call mainline denominations in New England. I won't say which ones. There is a remnant of people who still believe the scriptures and reach out to us quite often and say, can you help us find somebody to preach for us or somebody to be our pastor? Because there's a remnant that remembers the way it used to be. And one of the things that they always say is nobody brings a Bible to church anymore. So we get them Bibles for the pew Bibles for people to start using. And I jokingly say to pastors, I don't say it publicly, I say to pastors, I never thought my ministry would be smuggling Bibles into mainline churches, but it's kind of fun to say that, because in some ways that's, it's kind of, there's so many times that the Bible has been pushed aside. So you put it back front and center, and someone starts preaching, and then start watching the Holy Spirit work in those churches. And, and the amazing thing to us is that then their friends find out about it. Hey, can you find us a preacher like that? And a lot of times we just have connections, or a lot of times people say, hey, there's a building in town. You know, a church plant. We've got a building the city will give them. Now, you may have to do a lot of cleaning and repairs, but here's a presence in our city. That happens all the time across the city. And part of that is getting to know people beyond the ministry, has been really kind of neat. I tell people it's all about relationships. And in today's world, people don't meet many people who don't have an agenda. And so when you do it, I mean, I've heard from people in government. I think I can say this, it wasn't on the news, but I think it was probably 15 years ago. A legislator from Vermont reached out to us and asked us when we give a Bible to every legislator in Vermont. And we were thrilled to do that. And he happened to be a believer, probably one of the few believers. And, it was like, well, when are the cameras coming? We're not going to send cameras. In fact, I didn't even go to present them. I got someone to do it who was there. I still have a stack of letters. I still hear from legislators who are like, that was just so neat. He gave us a Bible. And I've read it. I had one, he was an elderly gentleman, long out of the legislature. But he wrote me and he said, the only time anybody gave me a Bible, he's now deceased, was before World War II, when I got one. It had a little Franklin Delano printed note in the front of it before I went off to war. And he said, no one ever gave me a Bible until you gave me this one. He became a believer before he got it.
Oh, wow.
Everything else was not worth it. It was worth just that one investment. So it's not because I'm a preacher, I believe it. I've seen it practically. The Word of God can go places and do things that none of us can do. So.
Yeah. Well, Phil, this whole conversation and your whole ministry have already, there's such a rich encouragement. This has been such a life-giving and encouraging conversation for me. But I want to give you opportunity, if you have any kind of parting word of encouragement to anybody listening in from your vantage point of having kind of had an outsider's, but with an insider's heart view on New England. I'll give you the final word.
Well, here's what I would say to every person in ministry is I think New England is a place of ministry where, unlike the South or maybe the Midwest, where in the South and the Midwest, when we do ministry, we often get to see immediate visible results, whether it's an increase in attendance, whether it's, an increase in giving. There's some way we feel like, okay, we've been validated. And I hate to say that, but you know what I mean? There's some evidence you can measure, but there are men and women across New England who have served faithfully for years and would really be pressed to be able to write out all of the visible things they've seen happen. But here's what I have discovered. Just because you did not see the visible happening did not mean God was at work behind the scenes. It's much like Joseph in the Old Testament, who could have thrown his hands up and said, Lord, why is all this stuff happening to me? But God had a plan, and he was in that plan. And because he remained faithful in his walk, ultimately he was in the right place to have the right impact for what God wanted to do. I think men and women in New England need to know that when we get to heaven, I don't think, and I mean this sincerely, I don't think it's the Billy Grahams and other people, or Phil Waldreps, or people that maybe have more visibility that are going to get the most rewards and who are going to get the most recognition. I think it's going to be men and women in places like New England who have remained faithful, who have not gotten the awards and the accolades and the applause or the attention, but they have remained faithful, that when they stand before God, they're going to be amazed at the lives they touched and the people they impacted for the cause of Christ. And so I just want to encourage you today. You may not get the recognition of others, but stay faithful, and you will be amazed when you get to heaven at the Lord you're going to.
So encouraging. Phil, thank you for all your investment in New England and beyond. We're grateful for you and for your ministry, and thanks for joining us today.
I'm honored. Anytime I can talk to people from New England or about New England, I'm always in. So anytime, Guy, my pleasure.
Wonderful. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to the Small Town Summit podcast. We hope that it was a blessing to you, and if you are interested in learning more about the Small Town Summit ministry, check out our website, smalltownsummits.com. We also want to let you know about an exciting opportunity to join us, the Rural Home Missionary Association, and Desiring God at a New England-wide conference October 5th through the 6th in Newburyport, Massachusetts. Our speakers, Dave Mathis and Scott Hubbard of Desiring God, will be helping small town pastors and ministry leaders remember that Christ is our treasure and goal in gospel ministry. For more information, visit stsfallconference.com. Again, that is stsfallconference.com. We hope to see you there.